The wind blew softly that afternoon, making the leaves dance under the golden light of sunset. She walked aimlessly down the street, lost in her own thoughts, trying to understand why life always seemed to circle back to the same unanswered questions. There was something inside her calling for change, a quiet longing to begin again, to finally feel that the universe was listening. Then she saw the notebook. It lay on the ground near the sidewalk of a cafe, its pages open as if the wind itself wanted her to see them. The cover was simple, worn, its edges marked by time. But something about that image made her stop. Her heart quickened, and for a moment, it felt as if time had slowed down. That object seemed to be calling her. She looked around, expecting someone to come back for it, but the street was almost empty. Kneeling down, she picked up the notebook gently and noticed it was open to a page that read, in elegant handwriting, "Gratitude is the daily miracle that keeps the universe in motion." As she read, a shiver ran through her body. It was as if those words had crossed the paper and touched something deep within her, a forgotten place, a quiet calling. Her eyes lingered on the phrase for several seconds until a single tear rolled down her cheek. She couldn't explain it, but that simple sentence felt as though it had come from somewhere beyond this world. She placed the notebook carefully inside her bag, instinctively protecting it as if it were a treasure. And as she walked home, she couldn't stop thinking about the strange feeling that had taken hold of her, a blend of curiosity, comfort, and purpose. Something within her knew this encounter was no coincidence. When she arrived home, she set her keys on the table, sat on the couch, and took the notebook out of her bag. She ran her hand over the cover, sitting in silence as a gentle, almost spiritual presence seemed to fill the room. Opening it again to the first page, she read, "Today, I choose gratitude." The phrase seemed so simple, yet it carried a weight she had never noticed before. She sat there, whispering softly, "Today, I choose gratitude." And for the first time in a long while, she felt like crying, not from sadness, but from recognition. It was as if the universe had answered her silent plea for change through that forgotten notebook. That night, she could barely sleep. The notebook rested on her bedside table, and each time she glanced at it, she felt that something extraordinary was about to unfold. She didn't know how or when, but deep down she was certain that it had crossed her path for a reason. Before drifting to sleep, she looked up at the dark ceiling and whispered, "If there truly is a greater force guiding everything, thank you for choosing me." Before everything changed, her life was made of repeated routines and postponed hopes. She woke up at the same time every morning, drank the same coffee, walked the same path to work, and came home with the same feeling: nothing was truly happening. It was like living inside a cycle that kept restarting without purpose. The alarm would ring, her body would move, but her soul stayed still. And that emptiness slowly grew in silence, without warning, until it became part of what she called normal. At work, time barely moved. She had been doing the same tasks for years, with the same dedication, but without any recognition. People who arrived after her were promoted before her. The compliments always seemed to land on the same faces. She watched it all with a restrained smile, trying to convince herself that one day her luck would turn. But deep down, she was beginning to believe that maybe life had simply forgotten about her. The hardest part wasn't the lack of opportunities, it was the painful feeling that nothing she did truly mattered. Bills piled up, and life grew tighter with every month. Any small setback, a burnt-out light bulb, a late bill, a last-minute medicine, was enough to keep her awake for days. There was no space for rest, only survival. And when the mind lives in scarcity for too long, it starts to believe there's no other way. That's how she felt, trapped in a small life, afraid to dream of something bigger and face disappointment once again. Sometimes she looked around and saw people living the life she had always dreamed of. A coworker traveling, a friend buying a house, a couple starting a new chapter together. She felt genuinely happy for them, yet a tightness filled her chest. Why did it never happen for her? Why did it feel like the universe skipped her name in the line of blessings? That silent feeling of being left out became a belief. And that belief turned into her truth. She started repeating to herself, I'm not lucky. I never make it. Those things aren't for me. And the universe, ever obedient, reflected that exact energy back to her. Days became heavier. She stopped dreaming, stopped planning. The future looked like a closed wall, and the past, a constant reminder of failed attempts. She lived on autopilot, breathing, eating, sleeping, but not truly living. She woke up tired and went to bed feeling guilty. Laughter became rare, and faith almost disappeared. Still, she kept pretending to be strong, because life didn't give her space to fall apart. But the body speaks when the soul is tired. Headaches came often, followed by sleepless nights and irritation for no reason. Small things became triggers, the sound of the alarm, her boss's indifferent stare, the mirror. Each reflection seemed to whisper, you got lost. And she knew it was true. She felt like a stranger inside her own story, as if she had forgotten who she was before settling into fear. Sometimes she imagined what might have happened if she had chosen a different path. But the same thought always followed, I didn't have a choice. That was the phrase she repeated whenever someone spoke about change, courage, or purpose. She truly believed she had no choice, that things simply were the way they were, period. That belief became her invisible prison, the hardest one to escape. One day, after yet another humiliating meeting, she left work with tears filling her eyes. The wind brushed against her face, and for a moment, she wished she could just disappear. When she got home, she threw her bag on the couch and stood in the middle of the room, staring at nothing. I did everything right, she thought. Why still doesn't it work out for me? The tears came without warning, along with a deep exhaustion that no longer fit inside her. She sat on the floor, rested her head on her knees, and cried until she lost track of time. That night, she didn't ask for help. She didn't pray, didn't scream, didn't complain. She just sat in silence, feeling the weight of everything she carried. That's when she realized something frightening, she no longer knew what she wanted from life. The dream of having a home, a love, a career, it all felt too far away, almost childish. What remained was cold, mechanical survival. And the most painful part was realizing that somewhere along the way, she had stopped believing. But the universe never forgets those who ask in silence. Sometimes, it's in the very moment when the heart breaks that life finds a small crack through which it can enter. And in that same city, under the same sky, something was already being prepared for her, an unexpected encounter, a response hidden within pages written by another soul who had also learned how to begin again. She didn't know it, but she was living inside an invisible cycle. The same thought that made her get out of bed was the same one that kept her stuck. I need to pay the bills. The phrase sounded harmless, yet it carried a vibration of fear. Every day began with the worry of what might be missing. And the universe, sensitive to human emotion, answered with more reasons for her to stay worried. Everything she sent out came back, not as punishment, but as reflection. And so, without realizing it, she kept feeding her own scarcity, believing she was simply being realistic. That's how her mind worked, it focused on what was missing, on what hadn't happened yet, on what could go wrong. Her words always carried the tone of lack, I hope it works, I don't think it will, I'm not sure I can. Her language was made of doubt, and the universe could only respond at that same frequency. When someone talked about faith, she smiled out of politeness. When someone talked about abundance, she thought it was a joke. She wasn't faithless, she had just tried too many times and given up on believing. The deepest belief she carried was unworthiness. Deep down, she thought good things were meant for better people, prettier, braver, luckier people. She believed the universe had favorites, and she wasn't one of them. That belief ran so deep it shaped her choices, sabotaged her chances, and painted her life in shades of fear. Even when something good happened, she felt it wouldn't last. It was as if an inner voice whispered, "Enjoy it while you can, because it won't stay." The fear of losing was stronger than the desire to win. That's why she never took risks. She turned down invitations, opportunities, even affection, convinced nothing would work out. Her problem wasn't bad luck, it was disbelief. Her mind had become a fertile field for negative thoughts, and her heart, a constant home for worry. Abundance often came knocking, but it couldn't find space to enter. And slowly, her body began to reflect what her mind created. Exhaustion became part of her day. Discouragement turned into routine. She walked with her shoulders heavy, as if carrying the weight of the world, and her energy felt drained. People around her could sense that heaviness, and it pushed them away even more. The lonelier she felt, the more she believed she was meant to be alone. It was a circle that fed itself. Yet deep within her, a spark remained. A faint, almost forgotten ember whispering, "This isn't all there is." Sometimes, in the middle of the silence, she felt a quiet calling, a longing to understand why, to discover whether there really was something greater guiding her path. It wasn't a conscious search, it was more like a nostalgia for something she had never lived. A yearning for meaning. And that desire, fragile but alive, began to stir. When the soul asks for change, the universe listens, even when the mind doesn't yet know what to ask for. That was the moment when coincidences began to appear. Words about gratitude started showing up on her social media. Phrases about energy and faith popped out from random videos. People she didn't even know began talking about purpose and manifestation. She pretended not to care, but something about those messages stirred her. It was as if the universe had started whispering, "Pay attention." One Sunday, while cleaning the house, she found an old planner tucked away in the back of a drawer. Inside were notes from a time when she used to dream big, lists of goals, motivational quotes, and simple wishes like, travel to the ocean, and, have a home that smells like peace. As she read, a knot formed in her throat. When had she stopped believing in those things? Life hadn't been cruel, she had simply forgotten to keep believing. That night, she lay in bed thinking about it. For the first time in a long while, she asked herself a different question: what can I change within me so that life changes around me? And that one question began to move the universe in her favor. Because the universe doesn't respond to force, it responds to intention. It feels when a request comes from a soul tired of merely surviving. And in that quiet moment, without realizing it, she opened the door for something new to come closer. And since the universe always finds subtle ways to answer, it chose something simple, a forgotten notebook filled with words of faith, to become the bridge between who she was and who she was about to become. The next morning, the sky was overcast, and the wind felt colder than usual. She woke up with that familiar sense of emptiness, yet something inside her felt restless. She couldn't explain it, just a strange urge to go out, to breathe different air. She made her coffee in the same rush as always, put on the same clothes as the days before, and left without any clear destination. She walked without really looking ahead, lost in thoughts about everything she had tried that hadn't worked. Each step felt like a sigh, each breath like a silent plea for something new. The streets were crowded, but she felt alone among the people. She glanced at the shop windows, at the hurried faces, and it all seemed like a world that no longer included her. It was as if life still had color, but she could only see it in shades of gray. She passed by a bookstore, thought about going in, but kept walking. She stopped on the sidewalk, looked up at the sky, and let out a weary sigh. "If something out there is listening, show me what I can't see," she murmured softly, barely realizing the words were hers. It was a small prayer, simple, but sincere, born from the depths of her soul. She kept walking, distracted, until the wind suddenly blew stronger, scattering dry leaves and papers across the ground. One of them brushed against her leg and stuck there. She bent down to remove it and noticed it wasn't just a piece of paper, it was the back cover of a notebook. She looked around and, just a few steps away, saw the notebook lying on the sidewalk, its pages open, the wind playfully turning them. She approached slowly, feeling a shiver run through her. It looked ordinary, yet something about it felt different. The pages weren't blank. There were handwritten sentences, some bold, others delicate, and among them, one stood out in the middle of the page: "Today, I choose to believe." She stood there, staring at those words as if looking into a mirror. For a moment, she forgot the noise of the street. Her heart began to race, and a feeling of presence surrounded her, as if someone, or something, was there with her. It was a feeling hard to explain, a mix of peace and curiosity, as though the universe had found a way to speak directly to her. She picked up the notebook carefully, and the instant her fingers touched it, she felt a soft, almost imperceptible vibration run through her hands. She stood still for a few seconds, observing the handwriting, the strokes of whoever had written it. She didn't know who had left that notebook there, but she knew it wasn't a coincidence. It felt as if everything, even the wind that morning, had been orchestrated so she would find it. She closed the notebook and held it close to her chest, like someone protecting something sacred. As she walked back home, her mind was filled with questions. Who had written those words? Why had she found it? And why did such simple sentences feel so powerful? She didn't have the answers, but there was something new in that feeling, a spark of hope, small yet undeniable. When she got home, she placed the notebook on the table and stared at it as one would look at a mystery. She opened it again to the first page and read slowly: "Gratitude is the daily miracle that keeps the universe in motion." She sat in silence, simply feeling. Those words seemed to pulse, as if they had a heartbeat of their own. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the desire to believe that life could be different. That night, before sleeping, she left the notebook on her bedside table. She looked at it one last time and whispered, "If this is a sign, I'm listening." She closed her eyes, and within the quiet, a gentle peace began to fill the space that once belonged to doubt. The universe had finally found a way to touch her heart. And as she drifted to sleep, the wind outside kept blowing, as if saying, "Now it's your turn." If this part of the story touched your heart, write in the comments, "I choose to believe too." Because sometimes, it's through a simple act of faith that the universe finds an opening to move. Take this moment to subscribe to the channel. This chain of stories exists to remind you that the impossible is only what hasn't been tried yet. Share this video with someone who needs hope, and let the energy of gratitude keep spreading. In the days that followed, the notebook became her silent companion. Every morning, before leaving for work, she would open it at random and read a sentence. Sometimes, it made no sense at all. Other times, it felt as if every word had been written just for her. It was as if the invisible author knew her pain, her doubts, even the tone of her silence. And little by little, those sentences began to echo in her thoughts throughout the day. At first, she read everything with skepticism. She thought it was beautiful, inspiring, but far from her reality. Positive thinking doesn't pay the bills, she would mutter while reading about gratitude and abundance. But something curious began to happen. The more she read, the more her mind began to slow down. The words, once distant, started to take on a new meaning. They weren't magical promises, they were reminders, invitations to see life through different eyes. One morning, she read a line that said, "The universe doesn't understand words, it understands feelings." She stopped, staring at that idea. For a moment, she realized how accustomed she had become to feeling fear, guilt, and worry, and how those emotions had been guiding everything in her life. Am I the one creating what I fear? She wondered. The thought made her uneasy. Yet at the same time, it was liberating, maybe there was still a way back. That night, she wrote at the bottom of one of the blank pages, "I don't know where to start, but I want to learn how to feel differently." It was the first time she had written anything in the notebook. And without realizing it, that simple sentence marked the beginning of a silent reprogramming of her soul. The energy shifted, subtly, but undeniably. Her heart began to make space for something new, faith. She started paying attention to small things, the sunrise, the smell of coffee, the smile of a stranger. Things that had always been there but she had never really seen. And in each of them, she tried to practice gratitude. At first, it felt forced, a mental exercise. But over time, she began to truly feel it. She discovered that gratitude isn't a habit, it's a vibration. One day, the notebook read, "What you give thanks for, expands." She repeated that phrase aloud several times. It seemed simple, yet it caused an internal earthquake. How many times had she actually thanked life? Almost never. She had always focused on what was missing. So she decided to test it. For every small good thing, she whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for the calm morning. Thank you for the bus arriving on time. Thank you for the coworker who offered me coffee. Thank you for another day." And little by little, through quiet and simple gestures, the energy around her began to shift. People started smiling more when they passed her. The atmosphere at work felt lighter. Even the tasks that once bored her began to feel easier. Nothing extraordinary had happened, yet she knew something was changing. One morning at work, she found a small note on her desk. It was from a coworker she had helped days before. "Thank you for listening when no one else would," it said. She smiled. It was the first time in months she felt her presence truly mattered. And that night, when she opened the notebook, the page read, "When you change the energy you offer to the world changes the way it responds to you." That sentence brought her to tears. For the first time, she understood what the notebook had been trying to show her all along. The power was never outside, it had always been within. Everything she longed for, recognition, love, purpose, was simply a reflection of the energy she carried inside. And in that moment, she made a silent promise: she would learn to co-create a new reality. She closed the notebook, held it against her heart, and whispered, "I choose to believe." And the universe, which always listens to what comes from the soul, began to move once again. The days that followed looked the same, but she was not. The way she saw the world had changed. Each morning, before leaving the house, she read a page from the notebook and took a deep breath, trying to feel the words instead of just understanding them. It was as if those sentences carried a living energy, gently reorganizing what she felt inside. And in that state of presence, the first signs of change began to appear, subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. It all started with small coincidences. She thought of an old friend, and he sent her a message that same day. She remembered a song that made her smile, and it played on the bus radio minutes later. She needed a misplaced document, and a coworker showed up holding exactly that. Ordinary situations, yet filled with a meaning she had never noticed before. It was as if the universe was softly saying, "See? I've been here all along." Those small signs lit something inside her. She began writing more in the notebook, not just about what she wanted, but about what she felt. She wrote words of gratitude, simple affirmations, heartfelt wishes. And the more she wrote, the more the world seemed to respond. One day, she wrote, "I attract opportunities that help me grow." That same week, her boss announced an opening for a coordinator position, the first in years. She hesitated to apply. The old voice still whispered, "This isn't for you." But something new spoke louder, "What if it is?" She spent the night wide awake, thinking about the possibility. The next morning, she wrote in the notebook, "I deserve to be recognized for my effort." And for the first time, she sent the email applying for the job. She felt fear, but she sent it anyway. It was a small step, but it symbolized a huge turning point. In the days that followed, she began noticing how she felt. When she was happy, things flowed. When she complained, everything seemed to stall. The notebook was teaching her without words, through experiences. She realized her energy shaped each day. When she woke up grateful, the day seemed to conspire in her favor. When she gave in to fear, the universe grew quiet. Life had become a constant dialogue between what she radiated and what she received. One morning, when she opened the notebook, she found a phrase that read, "Nothing changes until you change the way you see yourself." That line hit deep. She realized that for so long, she had looked at herself with guilt, with inferiority, with fear. And maybe, the first miracle was simply learning to see herself with love. That night, she looked in the mirror and said out loud, "I forgive myself. I deserve good things." She cried, but it was a gentle, freeing kind of cry. In the following days, she began attracting different people. A neighbor she had never spoken to invited her for coffee. An old friend reappeared with good news. Even strangers seemed kinder. It felt as though the universe had changed stations and her life was now tuning into a new frequency. Each small gesture, each smile, was a reminder that something greater was unfolding. One afternoon, she sat on a park bench and opened the notebook again. It read, "The universe responds to gratitude with generosity." She smiled, closed her eyes, and began to give thanks in silence, for the breeze, for the peace, for the chance to live differently. When she opened her eyes, a butterfly landed on the notebook. Small, blue, vibrant. She watched it, mesmerized. It felt like the universe had sent a message in the form of beauty. And deep inside, she knew, she was on the right path. From that day on, she began writing a new phrase every morning. She called it her daily co-creation. She wrote as someone planting seeds. Sometimes, it was simple phrases like, "I trust, I receive, I deserve." Other times, deeper desires, a peaceful life, a home filled with sunlight, work that brought joy. She didn't know how or when, but she believed each word she wrote was a request to the universe. And quietly, the universe began to respond. Energy started to move. Doors slowly began to open. Things that once seemed impossible began to align. And without realizing it, she was no longer the woman who had found a notebook by chance. She had become someone who was learning to co-create her own life. Weeks went by, and her life began to reorganize itself in a way that could no longer be called luck. The mornings had a new glow. The coffee tasted warmer, the air felt lighter, and people seemed kinder. She felt connected to something greater, as if every step was being guided by an invisible force. She no longer woke up with the same heaviness, she woke up with curiosity. She wanted to discover what the day would bring. And no matter how simple, each day brought a sign. One morning, she arrived at work and immediately sensed something was different. Her boss, the same one who rarely noticed her, called her into his office. Her heart raced. "Did I do something wrong?" she thought. But to her surprise, he began to praise her. He said he had been observing her commitment and that she was one of the most reliable people on the team. The words felt unreal. Then came the news, she had been chosen to lead a new project. She stood silent for a few seconds, trying to process it. It was what she had wanted for years. How many times had she imagined this moment, believing it would never come? Her hands trembled, but her smile came naturally. She thanked him, and as she left the room, she took a deep breath. The world looked the same, but inside her, everything had changed. The impossible had happened, and she knew it was the universe responding. That night, she came home and opened the notebook. Her hands trembled with emotion. She flipped through the pages until she found the one where, weeks before, she had written, I deserve to be recognized for my effort. She looked at the sentence and smiled, eyes brimming with tears. Thank you, she whispered. She didn't know exactly whom she was thanking, the universe, perhaps, or the strength that had awakened within her, but she knew what she felt was gratitude. Then she noticed something unusual. Next to that sentence, the paper seemed lighter, as if touched by light. She ran her fingers over it and felt a faint warmth emanating from the page. It wasn't her imagination, there was energy. It was as if the notebook vibrated in harmony with what she was feeling. The universe feels it when you give thanks, she thought, and tears filled her eyes as she realized she was no longer alone. In the days that followed, the changes continued. Small things began to resolve themselves. Bills that once seemed impossible to pay suddenly balanced out. Problems at work dissolved. People who used to be distant now seemed warmer. And each new event strengthened the same truth: when she changed on the inside, the world changed on the outside. One afternoon, as she walked home, she saw a sunset unlike any other. The sky was painted in golden and rose tones, and a deep sense of presence surrounded her. She stopped on the sidewalk and took a long breath. I understand, she murmured. She realized that everything she had lived through, the pain, the waiting, the silence, had been preparation. Every fall had led her to that moment, the moment she finally understood that nothing had been in vain. When she got home, she opened the notebook and wrote, I am ready for what's coming. It was a simple sentence, yet filled with power. She was no longer asking with fear, she was declaring with faith. She no longer sought to control, only to trust. And the universe loves when faith replaces fear. Because that's when it begins to move freely. That same night, before falling asleep, she felt a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Her heart beat in the rhythm of gratitude. She smiled at the ceiling, as if speaking to the unseen, and said, Thank you for reminding me that I can. And the universe, in its gentle silence, replied with what she needed most, peace. Weeks turned into months, and with each news cycle she felt something inside her begin to bloom. The project she had been given at work started to flourish. Ideas that once felt tangled now flowed with clarity, and people began to truly notice her. You have a different energy, a coworker told her. Everything seems to work when you're around. She smiled, but deep down she knew, what others called luck, she called alignment. The notebook had become her sacred ritual. Every day, before doing anything else, she wrote 3 words, Thank you, universe. It was her first act of the morning, before coffee, before messages, before worries. It wasn't just a practice anymore, it was a conversation. And the most beautiful part was that the more she gave thanks, the more reasons she had to be thankful. Blessings multiplied, small ones, big ones, all arriving in perfect rhythm. One afternoon, while writing about how peaceful she felt, she received an unexpected call. It was from a company she had done a small project for years before. They were offering her a bigger opportunity, and with it, a payment larger than she had ever imagined. For a moment, she stayed silent, trying to take in what was happening. Then she smiled to herself. The universe moves fast when you're ready, she thought. This new opportunity brought not only financial stability but something she had never truly experienced before, freedom. For the first time, she could choose without fear. She could breathe without guilt. And more than that, she could dream about building something of her own. The notebook, once a refuge for her pain, had now become a map for her dreams. She started writing her goals in detail, feeling them as if they had already happened. She described the place she wanted to live, the energy of the space, the scent of flowers by the window, the gentle sound of the wind. She didn't write as someone asking, but as someone giving thanks in advance. And something magical began to unfold, the universe responded at the same frequency. A short time later, she received a message from a friend about a house for rent. It's simple, but it has good energy, the friend said. At first, she didn't think about moving, but the description lingered in her mind. She decided to go see it. And the moment she walked in, a familiar shiver ran through her. The white walls, the small garden, the scent of new wood, it was as if the place had been lifted straight from the pages of her notebook. The universe had materialized exactly what she had written. She walked through the rooms in silence, running her hands along the walls, feeling the cool floor beneath her feet. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from recognition. "This is it," she whispered. Deep down, she knew that space had been hers long before she arrived. Everything about it resonated with the energy of what she had written, and what she had felt. In the days that followed, she began preparing for the move. There was no luxury, but there was meaning. Each box stacked felt like a symbol of rebirth. And when she placed the notebook on the counter of her new home, she felt as if she were closing one chapter and opening another. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly. That night, sitting on the floor of her new home, no furniture, no distractions, just the notebook on her lap and her heart full, she wrote, "I am living what I once asked for." The tears came, not from sadness, but from gratitude. The impossible was becoming her new normal. And the universe, generous as always, simply smiled, because when a soul vibrates in gratitude, miracles become routine. As the months went by, the house began to fill with life. The once empty walls now held laughter, the smell of fresh coffee, and the soft sound of music that played every morning. Sunlight poured through the windows with a warmth she had never felt before. It was as if the universe insisted on reminding her, with each new dawn, that the light had always been there, she had only needed to open the curtains. Work was thriving. The new project grew, and with it came praise, invitations, and even opportunities that once felt unreachable. Everything flowed with a grace that still moved her. Sometimes she would pause in the middle of the day, look around, and whisper, "Thank you." And the notebook, always there on the table, seemed to smile in silence. It was no longer just an object, it was a symbol of restored faith, a partnership between her and the universe. One afternoon, as she was writing, an unexpected thought appeared. What if this house is only the beginning? She stared at the sentence, surprised. Until then, she had been content with what she had, but something inside her whispered that the universe doesn't deal in limits. She took a deep breath and let the words flow. "I am ready for the next level of my life." The next day, she began to notice details she had never paid attention to before. Walking through her neighborhood, she admired the houses with blooming gardens, colorful doors, and open windows. Not with envy, but with admiration. One day, I'll have a house like that, she thought gently. Unlike before, there was no anxiety, no rush. Just a serene certainty that everything would come at the right time. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "I attract the home of my dreams, a place of peace, love, and prosperity." And for the first time, she visualized it in vivid detail: the garden, the plants, the sunlit porch. She could feel the scent of wet earth, the texture of wood, the whisper of wind moving through the leaves. She wasn't just imagining it, she was feeling it. And in that moment, without realizing it, she was sending out the most powerful kind of request, the one born from emotion, not from need. The days that followed were light. She didn't think constantly about the house, but the feeling lingered, hovering, vibrating softly. It was like a gentle background melody reminding her that the dream was already in motion. The notebook filled with new words, this time about prosperity, worthiness, abundance. And the more she wrote, the more life confirmed that she was ready to receive. One weekend, she decided to take a different route for her walk. She wandered through unfamiliar streets and, on a quiet corner, stopped in front of a charming house. The gate was slightly open, revealing a garden full of flowers. There was something familiar about it, a welcoming energy, a déjà vu sensation. Her heart began to race. She stepped closer and saw a small sign, available for rent. Her impulse was immediate. She wrote down the number and called that same day. The owner answered kindly and scheduled a visit. When she walked inside, time seemed to stop. Every detail felt like an answer: the scent of lavender, the golden light passing through the curtains, the soft rustle of wind. It was as if she were walking through her own dream. As she moved through the rooms, she realized she was smiling. "It's exactly how I wrote it," she thought. Emotion welled up in her eyes, and she had to breathe deeply not to cry. She knew, with every certainty in her heart, that this was yet another gift from the universe. As she stepped out of the house, a wave of gratitude and reverence washed over her. "Thank you for showing me that I can," she whispered softly. And in that instant, she understood, it wasn't just about moving into a new house. It was about shifting her vibration, her life, her identity. When she got the call confirming the lease, her first reaction was pure euphoria. She spent the rest of the day smiling to herself, her heart light, as if the universe had given her a silent embrace. She wanted to share her joy, to tell someone what was happening. She picked up her phone and called an old friend from work, someone who had always listened to her during hard times. She spoke with excitement about the house, the garden, the scent of new wood, the feeling of finally being where she was meant to be. On the other end of the line came a brief silence before the response. "Wow, that's great for you, but are you sure you can handle living alone? Rent, bills, maintenance, those things add up, you know." The voice sounded kind, but beneath it was a subtle tone of doubt. "I just worry, you know. We have to be realistic." She tried to laugh, replying lightly, but inside she felt a sting. Fear, that old, familiar feeling, was trying to sneak back in. After hanging up, she stood still, staring into nothing. The words echoed in her mind, "Are you sure? Can you handle it?" She took a deep breath, but her chest tightened. It was strange how other people's fears could awaken the fears she thought she had already outgrown. For a few minutes, she felt small, as if she had traveled back in time to the old version of herself, the one who doubted everything she wanted. Then she glanced at the table and saw the notebook. It was open, as if it had been waiting for the right moment. The page displayed a phrase written in steady handwriting: "Don't absorb other people's fear. They speak from the limits they believe in." She stared at the words for a long while until her breath returned to the rhythm of trust. Smiling, she closed the notebook and thought, "I don't need approval. I only need faith." In the following days, she began to realize that the universe not only delivers blessings, it also clears the path. People who had once been constantly around started drifting away. Some without reason, others with vague excuses. At first, it confused her. Did I do something wrong? She wondered. But the notebook offered another answer: when your energy changes, the universe rearranges everything around you. What doesn't vibrate with love dissolves. That's when she understood, it wasn't rejection, it was alignment. Those who constantly complained about life, who spread negativity, quietly faded from her space without her having to do anything. The pessimistic conversations stopped, the unnecessary opinions disappeared, and the silence became comforting. She realized that what she once saw as loss was actually healing, the universe was making room for new connections. One morning, while unpacking boxes from the move, she found an old note tucked among her papers. It was from a friend who was no longer part of her life. "You dream too much. Real life isn't like that." She smiled. There was no pain, only compassion. "Real life is exactly like this," she whispered. Then she tore the note into tiny pieces, feeling that she had just closed another chapter of limitation. The day of the move arrived like a gift. Sunlight streamed through the windows of her new home, and a soft breeze made the curtains dance. She placed the notebook on the living room table, looked around, and took a deep breath. "Thank you, universe. Thank you for clearing away what I didn't have the courage to let go of. Each box she opened felt like a symbol of rebirth, and every item she put in its place carried a new intention. In the days that followed, the house began to gain a soul. She planted flowers in the small garden, hung crystals by the window, and at night lit scented candles to honor the new chapter. There was no more fear, no guilt, no doubt. What once felt like a distant dream had become her reality, built not with hurry, but with faith. That night, as she wrote in her notebook, she recorded, "Not every departure is a loss. Sometimes, it's the universe making room for true love to stay." She closed her eyes and felt the peace of someone who had learned that life doesn't take away, it opens space. The sun poured over the park like a warm embrace, painting the falling leaves in golden tones. The young woman walked lightly, the notebook in her hands and a serene smile on her face. It had become a habit to sit on the same bench, always beneath the same tree. There, time seemed to slow down. She loved to write about what the universe was teaching her, small realizations, subtle signs, daily gratitudes. It was her silent ritual of alignment with life. But that day, something different happened. As she wrote, she noticed an elderly woman slowly approaching, leaning on a cane. Her eyes were kind yet weary, the eyes of someone who had seen much and was still trying to understand it all. The woman hesitated for a moment before asking, in a gentle voice, "May I sit here, dear?" The young woman smiled and nodded, making room on the bench. They sat quietly for a few moments, listening to the rustle of leaves dancing in the wind. The older woman glanced at the notebook and said, "I've seen you writing here for a while now. You seem focused, peaceful. Are you writing a diary?" The young woman smiled without looking up. "It's a diary, yes, but it's also a mirror. I write to remember who I am when the world tries to make me forget." The woman raised her eyebrows, intrigued. "A mirror? That's beautiful. But tell me, does it really work? These things about the universe, the law of attraction, gratitude. I've heard of them, but they sound too good to be true." The young woman closed the notebook slowly, as if guarding a secret ready to be shared. "It works, but not in the way most people think. The universe doesn't respond to what we ask for in haste, it mirrors what we consistently vibrate. I had to learn to become what I wanted to experience. I used to believe I had to fight, that good things were rare, that love and success were for the lucky few. But the universe was only reflecting what I carried inside." The elderly woman sighed deeply. "I suppose I've lived that way my whole life, fighting against the current, trying to control everything. And when things went wrong, I called it bad luck." The young woman looked at her with tenderness. "It wasn't bad luck. It was the reflection of the energy you believed you deserved. Life always responds to how we see ourselves. When I began to see myself as worthy of love, love found me. When I stopped doubting abundance, money started to flow. But as long as I said, 'I want' with my lips and 'I doubt' with my heart, nothing happened." The wind blew stronger, and the notebook opened on the young woman's lap as if moved by invisible hands. The pages fluttered until one stopped, as though the universe itself had chosen which message should be read. She pointed and read aloud, "The law of attraction doesn't create what you want, it amplifies what you believe." The elderly woman watched in silence, the words seeming to glow under the sunlight. "So that's why nothing ever changes," she murmured. "I say I want to be happy, but I spend the whole day complaining about life. I say I trust, but deep down I'm always waiting for things to go wrong." The young woman smiled gently and replied, "That's where change begins. It's not about pretending the pain doesn't exist, it's about changing the lens. Pain visits us to show where we still doubt the light. When you welcome it and say, 'I'm learning from this,' it loses its power to hurt you." The woman fell quiet for a while, her gaze wandering among the trees. "You know, I never thought about it that way. It's beautiful." but also a little scary. I'm afraid to start over, afraid to believe again. The young woman looked at her with compassion. Fear is only a reminder that you've forgotten how strong you are. The universe never stops listening, it just waits for us to speak its language. And that language is faith. They both fell silent, letting the wind fill the space between their words. The woman lowered her eyes and, almost shyly, asked, "Do you think there's still time for me?" Without hesitation, the young woman answered, "The universe doesn't have a clock. It only responds when the soul is ready. And from what I can see, yours is." The wind blew once more, and a loose page from the notebook slipped out, landing softly at the woman's feet. She picked it up carefully, as though holding something sacred. On the paper, written in steady handwriting, were the words, "What you seek is also seeking you." The woman smiled, her eyes glistening. "May I keep this?" she asked. "Of course," the young woman replied. "Maybe the universe dropped it on purpose." They both laughed quietly. The sun began to hide behind the trees, tinting the sky with soft orange light. The woman tucked the page into her purse, promising herself she would read it every day. The young woman returned to her writing, a new brightness in her eyes. She could feel something in the air, an energy of continuation, of purpose. As the woman slowly walked away, the sound of her cane marking a gentle rhythm, the young woman watched in silence. Deep down, she knew that their meeting hadn't been an accident. The universe had simply found another way to keep writing, this time, through the hands of someone who was just beginning to believe again. The walk home felt lighter that afternoon. The young woman walked slowly, holding the notebook close to her chest, her heart full of a peace she couldn't quite explain. The encounter had left something within her, a quiet knowing that the universe was stitching invisible stories together, weaving people into each other's paths at the exact right moments. The wind played softly with her hair, and every step felt guided by an unseen force. It was as if the universe whispered, "You've fulfilled your part. Now get ready for the next chapter." When she arrived home, she placed the notebook on the table and stood by the window, watching the sunset. The colors of the sky, gold fading into lilac, mirrored what she felt inside, serenity with a touch of wonder. She opened the notebook and wrote, "Today, the universe showed me that to teach is also to receive." She looked at the sentence for a long time, feeling something within her expand. It was no longer just about manifesting dreams, it was about becoming the kind of person who inspires others to believe again. In the days that followed, synchronicities began to multiply. Little signs appeared everywhere, phrases on billboards, random songs on the radio, unexpected messages from distant friends saying they had dreamed about her. It was as if the universe was having an open conversation, responding without words. One morning, as she woke, a thought came so clearly it felt whispered, "Freedom." That word echoed within her all day long. That afternoon, while walking to the market, she saw a car parked on the street and felt her heart race. She couldn't explain why, but something about that image touched her deeply. It was simple, beautiful, and carried a sense she hadn't felt in a long time, independence. She stopped for a moment, watching the reflection of the sky on the car's surface, and thought, "That's what I want. I want to come and go. I want movement. I want freedom." She returned home with the thought spinning in her mind. Sitting down, she opened her notebook and began to write without overthinking, "I am ready for the new. The universe guides me in safety and abundance." Then, below it, she added, "My perfect car already exists. I am simply aligning with its energy." And just like that, a new desire was born, not one of possession, but of expansion. It was a gentle request, without urgency, without fear. In the days that followed, she began looking at car models online, watching videos, researching prices, comparing colors. Sometimes she got excited, other times frustrated. None of them felt right. Something was always off, the price, the condition, the feeling. There's no point in forcing it, she thought. When it's the right one, it will carry my energy in it. One night, lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling, remembering the words of the elderly woman in the park, "Doubt interrupts growth." She closed her eyes and whispered, "I trust." Then she fell asleep peacefully, knowing the universe had already heard her, it was simply preparing the way. Over the next few days, the coincidences grew stronger. She began seeing the same car model everywhere, in parking lots, on the streets, in commercials about travel and freedom. Everything seemed to be part of a perfect choreography. The universe spoke softly, but she knew how to listen now. One morning, while walking around her neighborhood, she noticed something curious. She had never realized how many new neighbors had moved in. The streets felt more alive, the energy brighter. She sensed that life itself was expanding along with her. And though she didn't yet know it, the next synchronicity was waiting just around the corner. That night, before bed, she wrote once more in her notebook, "The universe always knows the way, even when I don't know where I'm going." She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and smiled. There was something in the air, a silent promise that something magical was about to happen. The days that followed began to take on a new rhythm. She woke early, sipping her coffee as sunlight filled the room, and before even opening her notebook, the same thought came, "Will today be the day I find the right car?" It became a ritual of sorts. She browsed listings, watched videos, read reviews, and with every image she saw, she tried to imagine the feeling, driving down open roads, the wind in her hair, the music turned up, and that long-awaited sense of freedom blooming inside her. But as the weeks went by, nothing seemed to fall into place. One car was beautiful, but far too expensive. Another fit her budget, but was worn down. Some looked perfect in the photos, but when she saw them in person, something inside her whispered, "This isn't the one." Why can't something just work out already, she thought in frustration, staring at the notebook on the table, still closed. Doubt, subtle and familiar, began to creep back in. One afternoon, after yet another failed attempt, she decided to go for a walk. She needed to clear her mind. The wind was gentle, and the sky was painted in soft shades of pink, a quiet reminder that the universe's timing is never late. She walked through the neighborhood, admiring the houses and the blooming gardens. She thought about how, months ago, all she had wanted was a safe roof over her head. And now, she wanted more, she wanted expansion. She smiled. "That's good," she told herself. "But I need to remember not to lose myself along the way." When she got home, she opened her notebook and wrote, "The universe doesn't understand hurry, it understands energy." Then added, "If I'm impatient, it's because I still don't fully trust." The words stung, but they also set her free. She stared at the sentence until a lump formed in her throat. Taking a deep breath, she promised herself that this time would be different, she would learn to wait in peace. In the days that followed, she decided to change her approach. Instead of searching frantically, she began to imagine what it would feel like to already have the car. She would close her eyes and picture herself driving down a sunny road, her hair blowing in the wind, a soft smile on her face. She didn't force the vision, she just felt it. And the more she felt, the more her heart began to open. But every now and then, the old habit returned. She'd grab her phone, just to take a quick look, and hours later, she'd find herself exhausted, lost in a maze of listings, doubts, and comparisons. Maybe the right car doesn't exist, she'd murmur, discouraged. And right then, she'd hear that soft inner voice, the one she'd come to recognize since finding the notebook, "It exists. It's just not time yet." One evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, a thought came to her like a whisper, "Do you really trust, or do you just say you do?" She sat in silence. She knew the universe never asked without purpose. And for the first time, she realized she was still trying to control the outcome. Okay, she whispered, I surrender. For real this time. From that day on, she began to act differently. Whenever she felt anxious, she reached for the notebook and wrote about gratitude, gratitude for what she already had, for what was on its way, even for what seemed delayed. She wrote, the universe owes me nothing. I'm the one who needs to learn to wait with faith. And slowly, her heart began to soften again. Curiously, the moment she let go of control, the synchronicities returned. She started seeing more cars of the same model she wanted. People around her began talking about sales, deals, opportunities. It was as if the universe was warming up the stage behind the scenes. She could feel it, something was about to unfold. That night, before bed, she looked at the notebook and whispered, I trust in divine timing. When it's meant to be, the universe will show me the way. She closed her eyes, and the sound of the wind against the window seemed to answer, it's closer than you think. The next morning, she woke with a different feeling, as if something was about to happen. The air felt lighter, and even the coffee tasted different. She sat at the table with her notebook open and wrote, today, the universe is working in my favor. And for the first time in a long while, she believed it effortlessly. She felt a serenity so pure it needed no explanation, the kind of peace that comes when the soul already knows what the mind has yet to understand. She went out for a walk through the neighborhood, as she often did whenever she needed to reconnect. The streets seemed more alive than ever. Flowers she had never noticed before painted the walls with color, birds sang louder, and even the familiar faces of her neighbors seemed to smile with a new kind of sincerity. It felt as if the entire world had gained brighter hues since she had learned to see through the eyes of her heart. As she turned the corner, she noticed a house she had never really paid attention to before. It was simple, charming, flower pots on the windowsill, a faded blue gate touched by time. She stopped for a few seconds, observing. There was something familiar about that place, a sense of calm, of warmth, as if she had been there before, perhaps in a dream. And right at that moment, the gate opened, revealing a woman with a gentle smile, carrying a bag of groceries. The woman waved kindly. Good morning. The young woman replied in the same cheerful tone and kept walking. But for some reason, that image stayed in her mind for the rest of the day. There was something different about that woman, a sweetness in her gaze, a peaceful energy that seemed to speak even in silence. Later that afternoon, as she was tidying up at home, that same feeling resurfaced, like a quiet reminder. She opened her notebook and wrote, today, the universe introduced me to someone who radiates serenity. I don't know why, but I felt a connection. Then she went on with her day, unaware of just how important that connection would become. In the days that followed, life moved with a softer rhythm. She kept noticing signs everywhere, street signs with words about faith, songs about trust, random conversations where someone happened to mention the exact car model she wanted. It was as if the universe kept whispering, it's on its way. And finally, she had learned to listen without rushing. One day, while walking again, she saw the same woman in front of the house, arranging flower pots. This time, they spoke. The conversation began with flowers, shifted to the neighborhood, and soon unfolded into dreams and new beginnings. It was light, effortless, but profoundly meaningful. When they said goodbye, something within her whispered, you'll see her again. Back home, she sat down and wrote in her notebook, the universe is always crossing paths, even when we don't understand why. She looked at the words and smiled. She was starting to realize that nothing was random, not encounters, not delays, not coincidences. Everything was part of an invisible tapestry woven by faith. That night, as she looked out the window, a shooting star crossed the sky. She closed her eyes and made a simple wish, universe, show me my next step. And for a moment, she felt a deep certainty that it was already unfolding, just not yet revealed. She fell asleep in peace, unaware that the next morning would bring the exact sign she had asked for, and that, at the end of that path of synchronicities, awaited the encounter that would change everything. That morning carried a different kind of light. She woke before her alarm, her heart beating faster, sensing that the universe was about to deliver a surprise. She opened the window and let the fresh air fill the room. The sky, still painted in shades of rose, seemed to announce a new beginning. She reached for her notebook and wrote, "Today is a good day for something to go right." She smiled. It wasn't a wish, it was a quiet certainty. As she sipped her morning coffee, her phone buzzed with a notification. A message from a friend she hadn't heard from in months read, "I just saw a car that's totally you. I almost tagged you in the post, can you believe it?" Curious, she asked for the link. When she opened it, her heart skipped a beat. It was the exact model she'd been visualizing for weeks, the same color, the same interior, even the same small detail she used to doodle in her notebook. She stared at the picture for a while, caught between joy and disbelief. But then came the test. The car was in another city, and the price was slightly beyond what she could afford. The old anxiety tried to creep in, whispering, "What if this is another one you miss?" She took a deep breath. Then she remembered what she had learned: don't control, trust. Closing her eyes, she whispered softly, "If it's mine, the universe will make a way." She spent the rest of the day at peace, no more scrolling through listings, no desperate searching for answers. That afternoon, she decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear her mind. The air was warm, the sky clear. She walked without direction, letting her body lead the way. Until, turning the corner, she froze. A car was parked in front of a house, same color, same model, same shining headlights. Her heart raced. She approached slowly, as if moving toward a dream she didn't want to wake from. The sunlight glimmered across the paint, and she knew, it was exactly the car she'd seen in her meditations. She stood there in silence until a gentle voice spoke behind her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She turned and saw the woman from the neighboring house, smiling warmly. "He's been my travel companion for years," the woman said, "but it's time to let him go." The young woman froze, her heart pounding. "You're selling it?" she asked, barely containing her excitement. "Yes," the woman replied. "I was planning to list it tomorrow, but maybe the universe decided to move a little faster." They both laughed, as if sharing a secret carried by the wind. They talked for a while about the car, the neighborhood, and life itself. It was a light conversation, yet filled with quiet meaning. The young woman felt something familiar, as if this woman was part of something bigger, something already written. Before leaving, she said, "You know, I've been trying to manifest a car just like this for weeks. Meeting you today can't be a coincidence." The neighbor smiled knowingly. "Nothing is coincidence," she said. "When something belongs to you, the universe finds a way to bring it to your doorstep." The young woman returned home overflowing with gratitude. She sat down and wrote in her notebook, "Today, the universe showed me what it means to align vibration with destiny. The moment I released control, it brought the dream straight to my door." She closed the notebook gently, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the wind blew softly, steady and tender, like a sign of confirmation. And without her knowing, destiny was already preparing the next chapter, the moment when past, present, and purpose would all meet in one single story. The next morning, the sun seemed to shine with intention. She woke before the alarm, her heart calm yet awake. There was no anxiety, only a sweet sense of anticipation, like someone who knows the universe has a surprise waiting just around the corner. She brewed her coffee, looked out the window, and saw the car parked in the same spot, gleaming under the golden light. The wind swayed the flowers in the garden, and everything seemed perfectly, divinely in place. She took a calm shower, dressed in something light, and left the house, notebook in hand, as she always did, even without planning to. As she approached her neighbor's gate, the sound of the birds seemed sharper, the air more alive. The woman was already waiting, smiling, as if she knew she would come. "Good morning," said the young woman. "Good morning," the neighbor replied softly. "Ready to take a closer look at the car?" They walked to the garage. Light streamed through the slats, illuminating the car in a way that felt almost symbolic. The young woman ran her hand along the cool metal surface, feeling a mix of awe and emotion. It was like touching a dream made real. The neighbor watched in silence, her eyes filled with that bittersweet blend of gratitude and nostalgia, the look of someone who knows the emotional value of something that has carried pieces of her life. "He's taken me to beautiful places," the woman said with a tender smile. "But now it's time to move on." They talked about practical things, documents, price, arrangements, yet everything flowed with such ease it felt more like a conversation between old friends. At times, the silence was so comfortable it needed no words. At others, they laughed about small coincidences, like how both loved the same shade of blue. At one point, the young woman opened her notebook to jot down a few details, and the neighbor watched curiously. "What a beautiful notebook, it looks old." The young woman smiled. "Yes. I found it by chance some time ago, and it changed my life. Everything I write in here somehow turns into reality." The woman leaned closer, her eyes suddenly glimmering with a strange mix of surprise and recognition. "By any chance, do you remember where you found it?" she asked, trying to hide the emotion in her voice. The young woman thought for a moment. "It was in a cafe, a few months ago. It was under a table, left behind, like it was waiting for me. It had phrases written inside, beautiful words, and I felt I had to keep writing in it. Since then, it's like the universe speaks to me through it." The neighbor fell silent, her gaze distant and touched. She brought a hand to her face, whispering softly, "That's incredible. I lost a notebook some time ago, just like that one. Same design, same worn cover, it had handwritten phrases about faith and gratitude." The young woman's eyes widened, her heart pounding. "Are you saying this notebook was yours?" They stared at each other, both stunned, as time seemed to stand still. The birds stopped singing, the wind paused, and for a moment, there was only silence, heavy with meaning. The neighbor smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "I guess the universe never loses track of what belongs where. It just delivers things to whoever is ready to keep writing the story." The young woman took a deep breath, her chest glowing with emotion. She looked down at the notebook and smiled. Then it did what it was meant to do, it brought back what was once yours, but transformed. The neighbor nodded gently. "And maybe it brought more than that. Maybe it brought us together to remind us that nothing is ever truly lost, everything transforms." They stood there in quiet awe, gazing at the car that had connected them and the notebook that had woven their stories together. And as always, the universe had played its perfect role, guiding souls that vibrated with the same faith, in perfect timing, in the most poetic way possible. The end of that afternoon felt like something out of a dream. The sun slowly set behind the houses, tinting the sky with shades of orange and gold. The two women were in the garage, finishing the last details of the sale. Everything was happening with an almost divine naturalness, no hurry, no bureaucracy, only flow. The distant sound of children playing and the scent of garden flowers made the moment feel suspended in time. When the paperwork was done, the neighbor held the pen for a moment before signing. "You know," she said softly, "it's strange. I always thought selling this car would be hard. It represents an entire chapter of my life. But today, looking at you, I feel peace. It's as if it's going exactly where it's meant to go." The young woman smiled tenderly. "I feel the same. It's more than a car, it's a symbol of how perfectly the universe knows how to guide the way." They hugged, calmly, like people who recognize each other without needing to explain. It was a quiet embrace, yet full of meaning. It wasn't the end of an exchange, but the beginning of a new chapter, a shared destiny the universe had patiently designed. When they stepped apart, the young woman extended the notebook toward the neighbor. "I think it belongs to you." It was the notebook that brought all of this together. The woman held it carefully, like someone reuniting with an old friend. She ran her hand over the worn cover and smiled, emotional. "Maybe it once belonged to me. But now, I think it belongs to both of us." They looked at each other in silence, and something deep settled between them, a spiritual trust, the certainty that cycles close, but never break. The young woman walked over to the car and ran her hand over the steering wheel, feeling the energy of a new beginning. "Funny," she said, smiling, "when I asked the universe for a car, I thought it would bring me movement. But it brought me purpose." The neighbor replied, "And to me, it brought faith." They both laughed softly, eyes glistening, grateful for the mystery that had brought them together. As they talked, a gentle wind moved through the street, making the window curtains sway and lifting a few dry leaves from the ground. Amid that silent ballet, a scene unfolded as if the universe itself wanted to sign its name at the end of the story. The old lady from the park was slowly walking down the opposite sidewalk, wearing her light shawl and the same calm, knowing expression as always. The young woman recognized her instantly. "Look, it's her." The neighbor followed her gaze and saw the woman waving from afar, with a discreet, wise smile. The two waved back, saying nothing. The lady simply walked on slowly, the wind playing with her gray hair, and disappeared around the corner, leaving behind the feeling that nothing, absolutely nothing, happens by chance. For a few seconds, time seemed to stand still. Both women remained silent, feeling the echo of that moment. Then the neighbor said softly, "Maybe this is how the universe writes its stories, connecting souls that already knew each other, but had simply forgotten." The young woman smiled, moved. "Yes. And sometimes, all it takes is a forgotten notebook to remind us who we really are." The sun was setting, the car gleamed under the last light of day, and the two of them stayed there for a while longer, unhurried, simply feeling. The universe was silent, but this time, the silence said everything. Night fell gently, carrying with it the scent of jasmine drifting in from the garden. The young woman stood by the window for a while, gazing at the car parked in front of the house and the reflection of the streetlights glimmering on its surface. She didn't see just a car, she saw the manifestation of everything she had learned about faith, surrender, and worthiness. She remembered every page she had written, every tear turned into gratitude, every moment when fear tried to return and she chose to trust instead. In the end, the universe had kept its promise, to deliver the dream in perfect timing. She took a deep breath and opened the notebook one last time that night. On the pages worn by use, she wrote, her handwriting trembling with emotion, "Nothing is by chance. Every encounter is an answer. Every goodbye is preparation. The universe never misses the address of what belongs to you." She closed the notebook, pressed it against her chest, and smiled. The house seemed to breathe with her, wrapped in peace. The next morning, the sun poured into the room like an invitation to celebrate. She walked downstairs and, before leaving, glanced at the mirror in the living room. She no longer recognized the woman who once doubted. Standing there was someone lighter, fuller, more aware that the power to transform her life had never been in the notebook, but in the faith with which she had used it. She picked up the car keys and smiled. "Thank you, universe. I've learned." Across the street, her neighbor watched through the window, holding the notebook in her hands, her fingers tracing over the old and new pages as if feeling the pulse of two intertwined stories. Some sentences had yellowed with time, others still shone with fresh ink. She read one of the first lines, "I believe everything happens for a reason." And she thought about how the universe had confirmed that, line by line. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Gratitude, for coming back to me transformed." Then, with a soft smile, added, "But now, it needs to keep going. She placed the notebook inside a fabric bag, closed the gate, and began walking slowly down the street. The wind played with her hair, and the whole scene shimmered in a calm, golden light. A little further ahead, at the corner, she spotted a familiar figure, the elderly woman from the park. The neighbor recognized her from afar and waved joyfully. The lady smiled back, the same serene, knowing smile of someone who understands that the season of harvest always arrives. They met halfway, shared a brief hug, and the neighbor handed her the bag. "I think the universe wants it to stay with you now." The elderly woman took the package, not fully understanding, and the neighbor simply said, "Open it when you feel it's time." She continued walking, leaving the lady standing on the sidewalk, holding the gift like a secret from destiny itself. A gentle breeze blew once more, slightly opening the bag, just enough for the worn, familiar cover of the notebook to peek out, radiating an old yet vibrant energy. The lady smiled and continued walking, listening to the soft rustle of the trees. When she got home, she placed the bag on the table, made herself some tea, and sat in her usual armchair. As she reached into her purse for her glasses, her hand brushed against something folded at the bottom, the small piece of paper she had kept from the park. She unfolded it carefully and read again the phrase that had changed something inside her that day: "What you seek is also seeking you." She looked at the notebook resting on the table and felt a silent tear fall. Whispering softly, she said, "Then maybe, it's my turn to learn." Outside, the universe replied with the sound of the wind gently brushing against the window. And so, without haste and without end, a new story began to be written. And today I choose to believe.